Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have some absolutely terrifying encounters I'd like to share with you. Before we get into these encounters, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook version. Written by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny, is available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those books are in the description as well. Now, I've taken enough of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first encounter comes to us from Kentucky. Back in October 23rd, I woke up to a bunch of crows raising hell on my property. It was just about daylight. I grabbed my shotgun loaded with double-aught buck, and I noticed a dead deer, bald on the edge of one of my ponds. As I walked over to investigate, I stopped and noticed the crows were alerting to something 40 yards up the hill from the deer. I went back to my house, got dressed, holstered my 1911 .45, and switched to my semi-auto .308 rifle, and went back. I decided to get above where the crows was at, and flush out what was there. When I moved in above that spot, the crows left, and I found a large depression in the leaves behind a big log from the deer. I went down and dragged the deer up behind the log and noticed how strange the deer had been mutilated and brutalized. There were no drag marks, no prints, no blood, no guts, or tufts of hair anywhere around the area. The deer had been carried and dumped there in the depression for an attack on whatever would investigate the deer kill. The deer's head had been bitten down on its skull, and the wound on the left side of the deer's head had punctured through its skull, and the other scraped the skull. It was a massive creature to bite down on that deer's head like that. Also, the deer's backbone was ripped out from its abdomen, and the deer's right leg was broken just above its hock. There was no blunt force trauma anywhere on the deer's body. The deer's shoulders were turned inside out, and its back loins were removed, and the deer was completely drained of all its blood. All the deer's white underbelly was removed along with its guts. All the diaphragm was cleanly ripped out with the guts. Whatever had done this was incredibly powerful. That diaphragm muscle is extremely strong, and no known predator is capable of removing the diaphragm in such a manner. Not even a human. I searched the rest of the day for the deer's kill site on my property, but I never found where the deer had been killed. The deer was killed off my property and carried a long way to place it next to my pond. Honestly, the deer looked like it was caught with a bite on its head, raised up off its feet, grabbed by its hind leg, and punched through its underbelly to its spine and ripped its spine out for the kill. That's my assumption of how that deer was killed. I thought the morning event was the end, but later that night, at midnight, something massive let out a deep howl that lasted about 10 seconds. An hour later, something was outside growling and circling my house. It circled my place about 60 to 70 times and tried to open my door and tried to pull one of my windows out by its frame. It also raked its claws on the side of my house as it circled. Just before daylight that morning, it left. All during the next day, I had a strange, uneasy feeling. Something was wrong and I was in danger. The second night it came back, and I opened the blind of the window at my kitchen sink to see what this thing was. It was dark with little moonlight outside, and then it walked by my window. My heart sank as I tried to make sense of what I was looking at. This creature was walking upright on two legs. I could see its arms swinging as it walked by. It had a head the size of a large grizzly bear with ears about 7 inches long and a long snout. It stood approximately 8 feet tall, and it was all black. I watched it several times pass by my window as it kept circling my house. I put down the shotgun and picked up my .308, knowing I had no chance with the shotgun if I had to defend myself. The creature stopped at the window, walked up to it, and bent down to look inside. I raised my rifle and aimed at its head. It couldn't see me where I was standing, off to the side. Then both of its ears turned towards me when I flipped off the safety switch in case I had to shoot. It stood there listening, and then backed away slowly and continued to circle my house, raking its claws and testing my windows and door. The size of this monster, I could have definitely ripped through the wall or door with little effort. I estimated its size from the shoulder to shoulder at 38 inches with massive arms and an upper body. I never saw its eyes as it was dark outside and it was all black. It circled my house about 30 times in 4 hours the second night and walked away. I waited about an hour and decided to go to bed. About 30 minutes of lying in bed, I could hear something approaching the wall where my head was at. Once it got closer, I could hear a heartbeat. As it got closer, the heartbeat got louder. Then I could hear bristling fur rubbing against the wall where my headboard was. The heartbeat got louder and louder, and my dog, while hiding and shaking, started whining as if he was dying. I jumped off the bed and grabbed my rifle. I thought I might have been somehow hearing my own heartbeat, so I checked my pulse, and my pulse was slower than what I was hearing. The heartbeat got so loud that I could hear the blood pumping through its heart. The blood sounded fizzy, like Coca-Cola was pumping through its heart. This creepy heartbeat lasted for about 2 minutes, and then as the creature backed away, the heartbeat slowly faded until the creature left, and the heartbeat stopped. I don't think it has come back since the heartbeat, but I seriously believe it will be back with more elaborate tricks to either kill me or run me off my place. I am a U.S. Marine combat veteran and former Leo. Also, I found a deer fawn, the same exact area near the pond, the same time this creature was bothering me. The fawn had been attacked but was still barely alive and bawling in pain. I had to put it out of its misery. I chalked it up to a dog attack. I'm starting to think maybe it was using my abandoned farm as its hunting ground. My farm is totally secluded and no one ventures on this place, and even now, where they know I patrol my area, if this Dogman is making a peace offering, it's going about it all wrong. It killed one deer it should have left alone and stalked me for 2 days. Being a U.S. Marine and heavily armed, with also night vision, I recently purchased shotgun slugs designed to kill grizzly bear. I set up tripwire alarms in the perimeter around my house and game cameras. So far, I've only captured pictures of some resident raccoons. Also, when this Dogman was harassing me, I had a game camera set where I feed the deer, and there were coyotes here during that time. I've never captured pictures of coyotes here before or after, and never seen any or heard any coyotes here. I'm an avid hunter and survivalist, and I believe I will start working on an underground shelter. I was planning on building an underground shelter for tornadoes, but now with an 8-foot-tall Dogman, I'll definitely be digging in. After my encounter, I started researching about what I saw here, and I'm shocked that there are so many encounters, and a hive of Dogman living near an abandoned sawmill in Grand Rivers. Grand Rivers is just 18 miles away by drive. I have noticed several other strange and unusual things here that I don't know what it is. Things that trigger my game camera and harass the deer. Today's second encounter. It's hard to believe that it's been 29 years, but it has. I was 12, and for the first time I was being allowed to go deer hunting. This was meaningful, as now I was being considered a man in the family, someone who could put meat on the table, or so to speak. The hunting trip took me to a 200-acre parcel of family-owned land in Wisconsin. There I'd be hunting with my dad, my uncle, my cousins. I was no stranger to this property, as I pretty much spent every summer of my childhood there. My cousin was just as excited about my first trip as I was, so upon my arrival, he took me out to the woods to show me something strange. He said, "You want to see something weird?" I said, "Yeah." He picked up a big stick, swung, and whacked a tree hard. He repeated this several times. I wasn't sure what he was doing until I heard a whacking sound off in the distance. At first, I thought it was an echo. He handed me the stick and told me to try. Like him, I whacked the tree several times, then waited. Just like before, I got a response far off in the woods. I'll admit, I didn't know what it meant, and in some ways, I thought it was kind of cool. My cousin then let out a yelp. Seconds later, something responded. Again, I didn't know what to think about any of this that he was showing me, and before long, we went back to the cabin. I was fascinated by what could be responding to our whacks and yelps. Unable to get the odd incident out of my mind, I went back out to the same spot later. I picked up the branch I had used before, swung and whacked the tree. Like before, a response came, but this time it was a different part of the property and closer. When I think back, I don't ever recall hearing about or knowing people who did tree knocks or vocalizations. It was apparent my cousin knew about it, but I was oblivious. Heck, I don't even think I knew what Bigfoot was at the time. Confused, I brought it up to my uncle, who was a man of few words. He simply told me to stop knocking on trees and mumbled a name that I was unfamiliar with. I shrugged it off and went about the rest of my day. What's odd is it wasn't until much later in life did I hear that name again, this time from the prominent Bigfoot researcher Coonbo Baker. That night I was told where I'd be hunting. They were going to stick me way out at the far end of the property, a place I had been told to avoid before because of how remote it was, and that I'd get stuck back there due to the bogs and creeks. Looking back now, I kind of find it ironic I was stuck in one place I was told to stay away from. The morning came and it was chilly. My uncle took me out and dropped me off. Before he left, he instructed me to stay put and that he'd come get me by the end of the day. I nodded and he went on his way. This part of the 200 acres was much different than any other part. In fact, the whole atmosphere changed back there. It went from hardwood to really thick brush, high grass, and, like I mentioned before, bogs and creeks. I went to an old willow tree which held a rickety and aging tree stand. I put my foot on the first step, applied pressure, and sure enough, the first step broke. I thought to myself, great. In order for me to reach the second step, I'd have to go back and make a running jump for it. Being 12 has its disadvantages, height being one of them. I took a few steps back and went for it. I easily made the second step, although I was a bit nervous that it'd break as well, which would send me to the ground crashing and hard. This old tree stand wasn't very sturdy to begin with, as they'd used old scrap wood. Using every ounce of caution, I scaled up and took a seat. Time ticked away, and a chill began to set in. Not a chill from fright, but because I had been motionless, like a good hunter should be. It was a cloudy day, and the warm rays of the sun were being hidden. More time ticked away, and I knew I was doing a good job being still as every squirrel and bird came close, oblivious that I was even there. The sun crept toward the horizon. The day was getting away from me. Yet I'd not seen a deer. I suspected the shooting hours had passed and that my uncle would show up at any time. Patiently, I waited, and waited, and waited. Dark wasn't far off, and still my uncle hadn't come get me. I grew concerned, and I knew I had two choices. I could continue to wait or get down and head back by myself. As I made my mind on what to do, I took notice that everything around me had gotten quiet. Fear suddenly took hold of me. I had felt it before in my life, but not to this level of intensity. My eyes darted around and I looked for squirrels or birds that had populated the woods around me all day, only to find that they were all gone. I couldn't see anything around me, yet I knew I wasn't alone, that something was out there. The fear kept rising, but why? I still hadn't seen anything. Regardless, my senses screamed at me, "Go, run, run, get out of there." I knew that something wasn't right, but I just couldn't put my finger on it. The sun was sinking, and it was getting darker by the second. I now knew that no one was coming to get me, and that I was going to have to make a go of it on my own. I got ready to get out of the stand, then did everything you shouldn't do with a 30-30 lever-action rifle when climbing out of a stand. I half-cocked the rifle because I knew I'd be the most vulnerable and exposed as I climbed out of the stand and down the willow tree. I couldn't see much of anything around me yet. I couldn't shake this feeling that something was there and close by. I slowly navigated down the tree, taking care with each foot placement until I reached the last step. From there, I planned on jumping. Without a second hesitation, I leapt, hit the ground, and quickly recovered. I got up and now facing down the path, or what might have been an old deer trail. What little bit of light was left illuminating the open space in front of me, it was then I spotted something rise just off the trail to the right, about 30 feet. It towered like nothing I had ever seen before. I guess now that it stood over 7, maybe 8 feet tall. My body tensed, and the fear that I thought was elevated already rose almost to sheer terror. Instinct, I cocked the hammer fully back on the rifle and threw it into my shoulder. Just as I did that, whatever this thing was raised one leg, stretched it out, and placed it on the opposite side of the trail. It now straddled both sides, its massive frame focused on me and my rifle. I have to laugh now because, believe it or not, I began to think about hunter safety, know your target, and beyond. My mind screamed at me for just a brief second before I hollered back, "Know your target." I don't know what I'm even looking at. Whatever it was could only be described as massively tall, around 7 to 8 feet tall, and wide, its shoulders spanning feet across the trail. The fading light of the day shined from beyond it, making it impossible to make out good detail, but the outline was crystal clear. I made out that it was standing on 2 feet, had legs, arms, and a head. I could also make out hair or fur or whatever you want to call it. I thought to myself, what am I seeing? With the butt of the rifle at my shoulder, I put the scope on it and looked through. My scope was low-powered with a yellow filter, which illuminated everything a bit more, but still not enough to clearly make out what I was seeing. I placed the reticle of my scope on the vitals, placed my finger on the trigger, and stood ready to unload everything I had if it made one move towards me. The entire time I thought that I was going to die, that this was it. I still couldn't make out any facial features of the creature because the light came from behind it. But I just knew that this thing could easily kill me. With all the slack taken out of the trigger, I was ready to fire, but it didn't move. Both of us were at a standstill, our gazes fixed on each other. I couldn't say how long we stood staring each other down, but it felt like forever. Then, without notice, it leapt to the right from where it stood. All I heard now was crashing as it fled. A moment later, there was silence. then I saw something further down the trail. It was a silhouette of a deer. It dawned on me that I had come in between this thing and its meal. I assumed it must be mad at me. So I did the worst possible thing. I turned and ran. With each step, my heart pounded till the point that I swore I was going to explode. My vision narrowed, which made it harder to get a good view. To my right, the direction that the thing had gone, I heard movement. I now thought this thing was going to circle around and come and get me. I got up, swung my rifle around, and again readied myself to fire, but nothing was there. Without wasting another second, I pivoted and raced off again down the trail. I don't know how long it took me, but I did finally make it back to camp. Not a second after my arrival, my uncle and everyone began to haze me. They could tell that I had been spooked, with someone joking that I looked like I had saw a ghost. What they didn't know was that I saw something far worse. I asked my uncle why he hadn't come and got me. He replied that he had tried but couldn't find me. I didn't know what to believe. All I knew was I was glad to have made it out of there alive, as I was sure my demise was certain. I rushed inside the cabin with my rifle, only to have my uncle remind me that he didn't take weapons inside, only because he said they sweat from the change in temperature. I told him I would clean it, and I went inside. I wiped down the rifle and carefully hid it loaded under my bed and slid my sheath knife underneath my pillow. While I had made it back, I couldn't calm down and didn't feel safe. A large window overlooked my bed, and all I could imagine was being awoken to this thing staring over me just outside that thin pane of glass. I could see it crashing through the walls, taking hold of me, and, well, that'd be it. Needless to say, I didn't sleep an hour that night. Come morning, everyone was up, and the last thing I wanted to do was go back out there. I hadn't told anyone what had happened, but they knew something was wrong. However, that didn't stop them from hazing or making fun of me. It was just what they did. I told my dad I didn't feel good, that I had gotten too cold the day before, so maybe I could take the stand closest to the cabin. My plan was to bag a deer fast as I could and get the hell out of there. I knew this was my only way out. I arrived to the new stand, and believe it or not, I got a deer rather quickly. I was excited, mainly because now I could head home. Then I was told there were more tags to fill, so I'd have to help drive the deer to the others. My heart sank. I felt defeated and terrified because that meant I have to go back out there. With my hands white-knuckled on my rifle, I walked through the woods. My head swiveled back and forth every time I heard a sound. With each crack of the branch or crunches of the leaves, I snapped my head with the expectation of seeing that monster pop up, only to see a deer or a squirrel. I made it through the drive, which ended the hunt. Hours later, we headed back home. Looking back now, I think it's fair to say my life was on the line that day. And the one thing that saved me was my old 30-30 lever action. I can still feel it angrily looking at me, both of us locked in a standoff with neither committing to act. I went back to the property a few years later, but made sure I never went to that part of that property again. I figured that was his territory, and also figured he was probably still mad at me. As the years passed, I tried to convince myself that I hadn't really seen what I saw, that it was all my wild imagination of a 12-year-old. I dared never mention it to my family for fear of being mocked or ridiculed. So I held the fear from that day, never uttering a word until now. Even with my best efforts to wipe my memory of that time or imagine it was something else, I always regress. I don't ever think I'll ever forget that day, like so many others I've heard tell their story. It's something that becomes seared into your brain. I still venture back out into the woods, but now I go with the knowledge that there are creatures there that could do us considerable harm. When I go out, I'm always armed. Whatever those things are, they know what rifles are, and I believe they also know what they are capable of. My rifle saved me that day, 29 years ago. I know this without question. I also know that on that day there were 2 hunters in the woods. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed today's upload. I've got those questions for the Q&A with Coonbo. I'm going to give him a call tomorrow and see when he wants to do it. Looking forward to doing that with him. I also have a gentleman from Maine that I'm going to get in touch with on Sunday. He's got some pretty interesting encounters he wants to share. So I'm looking forward to that as well. With that, I'm going to bid you all farewell. Have a great night, guys. Thanks.